Hey friends, it's Nikayla from the podcast Side Hustle Pro. I'm always looking for ways to keep my kids entertained without screens, and the Yoto Mini has been a total lifesaver. My kids started using it right away and haven't stopped since. Hours of stories, music, podcasts, and more, and no screens or ads. Yoto is a screen-free audio player where kids just pop in a card and listen. With hundreds of options for ages 0 to 12, it's the perfect gift they'll go back to again and again.
Hello listeners, and welcome back to another episode of Scary. A huge thank you to everybody who has voted in the Signal Awards. I'm not sure if this podcast will be out in time. The deadline goes this evening and I'm actually recording this on the day, but fingers crossed that the podcast brings home its first award. Before we get into this week's episode, we need to say a special thank you to our new Patreon subscribers, who are Jen Williams, Katrin Paver, Julie Norris, Sabuku, Brooke Whitaker, and Jerry. Thank you so much for signing up to the show's Patreon, and there's some people that signed up for a year, so thank you so much for doing that. And if this is something you're interested in, where you can gain access to ad-free main episodes as well as gain access to exclusive scary episodes, you can find the link for the show's Patreon in this episode show notes. But now, let's get into our next paranormal experience. I used to volunteer at a charity shop a few years back. It wasn't one of the big national names, it was more of a local run kind of small community trust. It just had one floor. I ended up working there after moving to the area. I always loved giving back any way I could, and I thought it would be a great way of meeting some people in the area, making some new friends, I guess. My full-time job was an office job that didn't exactly make me feel useful. I ended up doing the odd late afternoon, and they had a rotation type system for Saturdays, so I ended up working one every month. It was mostly retirees that were volunteering, and then I was the token younger one. I had worked in charity shops before, and I kind of knew how they operated, and it wasn't long before I was closing up on my own and finishing Saturdays in the shop. I didn't really mind closing. You kind of had your own little system of making sure the place was clean and tidying up the rails and switching off the radio, pulling the till report, cashing up correctly and putting the money away in the safe, turn off the lights, lock your door, go home. The switch for the main lights of the shop were behind the counter, so when closing came around you would have to walk through the shop in the dark. The store itself was decorated like a hangover from the 90s, I want to say. It was not modern, but it wasn't super old. I'm sure the building had some sort of history to it, but I wasn't aware of what that was. The first weird thing that happened in the shop happened on a Wednesday in early autumn. I remember that because the evenings had just started getting darker, and I had been rushing to finish up pricing a box of these donated handbags. Nobody had come into the shop for, I want to say, about 30 minutes. It gets like that in the evening time. I just remember putting the box of the handbags to one side and thinking, you know what, someone can do this tomorrow. And I started cashing up. I started to close the shop down. When I had everything done, I turned, like I always would, to hit the switch for the main lights. When you would turn off the lights, you'd have a glow from the street lamp, so you weren't in complete darkness in the winter or autumn. I just remember putting my coat on, and I was halfway through the door when I heard this sharp swish coming from the back of the shop. It was a sound that I knew. It was the sound of the changing room curtain sliding across the rail. It stopped me mid-step. Those curtains were thin and they always snagged on the pole. We would sometimes tie them back, kind of wrap them around themselves so they were sitting to one side. So I just thought, it was after coming loose and kind of fell down. And then it happened again. The same noise as if somebody had stepped inside the changing room and drawn it closed. So I'm thinking, oh God, there's a customer in the shop, and I've totally not realised they had been there. So I just quickly go over to the desk and turn the switch on, and the shop lights up. And I look in the direction of the changing rooms. There was only 2 in the store, and they were side by side. I just called out, sorry, I didn't realise somebody was here. There was no one there. There was nobody in the changing rooms. One curtain had been closed, the other was opened. And I just remember bending down and looking to see if I could see ankles or somebody inside. There was nobody inside. Went over, I opened the curtain. Empty. So I think, somebody's hiding in that stockroom. Maybe they've gotten into the stockroom. So I go over to it. It's locked. We had a punch pin for the door to open. The door was closed. You would have to know the pin to get in. So I punch it in regardless. I open the door. The stockroom isn't big. You can see what's in there. You can see if there's somebody in there, you would spot them immediately. Nobody's in there. Place is empty. Shop is empty. I just turned off the lights again and quickly left. And I just tried to convince myself that it was nothing. Walked down to the bus stop and kept kind of replaying the sound in my head. Curtains don't slide like that across without being pulled. I could hear the rings pull on the bar. That night I mentioned it in our volunteer WhatsApp group for the shop. Nobody got back to me for a while. I relayed the story and I just got a laughing emoji back. The next week I did a double check at the curtain rail before closing. Part of me was waiting to hear that sound again. Part of working in a charity shop is that every time you're going in there, there's new stuff. There's new donations dotted around the place. And you'd have to restrain yourself from picking up things, or else you were just constantly bringing things that you didn't need home. Anyway, I want to say a few weeks passed and I was working a late afternoon shift in the shop again. There was some new things in the shop. There was a few more lamps and crockery, glassware. It always amazed me when people would give away stuff that's really, really nice. I know it's for charity, but some of the things that would come into the store were just beautiful. Anyway, one of those things was a lamp that had come in that was quite beautiful. Somebody had placed it on a small table where we keep all the books in the back corner of the shop. That afternoon, one of, I want to say, our regulars came in. Her name was Doreen and she lived local. She came every week. I want to say she was in her 80s. She was a lovely woman, but she had this way of drawing you into long conversations about her neighbour's hip replacement and bus timetables and the latest thing that was going on in politics. And whenever she would come in, even though we kind of loved her, you would be stuck with her for a long time. I didn't really mind, it was kind of quiet anyway. So we stood just beside the desk and she was talking away and chatting. And as she was chatting, I noticed something about the light in the corner of the shop. It was going on and off every now and then. And honestly, I didn't have much past on it at all, because in my head I just thought there's a child in the corner of the shop and they are switching this on and off. That's my initial thought. And Doreen just kept on talking, and this light every now and then would go on and then go off. Just a light in the corner of the shop in my peripheral vision, bright, then off, then bright, and then off. I did kind of look around to see his or kids in here messing with stuff. It wouldn't happen that regular, but you know, it did happen. Anyway, I tried to make myself busy, and Doreen finally left with a scarf that she really wanted, and when she was gone, I turned towards the corner of the shop, walked down to see what was going on. Nobody's in the corner of the shop. Okay, so the kid or whoever was in have gone. Then it dawns on me, there's no power source in the corner of the shop. The lamp isn't plugged in to anything, and if you were to plug the lamp into a socket, you would have to get an extension lead and run it across the floor into the nearest socket. I couldn't understand how that happened. It completely baffled me. It bothered me for the rest of the day. Just before closing, Marion, who was another volunteer, came into the shop and said that she had forgotten something in the storeroom. So she goes, gets whatever she needed in the storeroom, and she just made small talk for a few minutes and asked, how's the afternoon going? And I said, yeah, fine. I was like, oh, that lamp is so weird, and told her the story. I said how it turned on by itself. I seen it light up. And once the words came out of my mouth, I just thought, oh my God, she'll think I'm crazy. And she smiled like someone humouring a child, and she just said, oh, that happens with those old shades sometimes. They catch the light weirdly, refracted, bit of glass trickery. My mum had one like that, actually. That sounded reasonable. I wanted it to be reasonable, but this was not glass trickery. This was a clear light on, light off, light on, light off. I want to say by this point I was definitely feeling a little bit on edge when I was working in the shop, especially if I was on my own. Anyway, months pass and I hadn't experienced anything weird like those two other things. It was a Wednesday late shift that I was working in the shop. The street gets really quiet by around 5. It had been a slow afternoon. It comes near cash up time and I'm doing what I do, going through the process, behind the desk. I just remember putting notes into the blue bank bag, and just as I had done that and placed it back on the counter, I heard somebody running in the shop. Not a shuffle, not an upstairs thud next door, proper quick-footed running right down the middle of the shop. I want to say it lasted probably 2-3 seconds. It was so startling. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know if something was falling. I didn't know if something was collapsing. I just remember looking all around the shop to see what was after happening, and there was some hangers that were swaying and banging off each other. So I went over to look, but there was nothing after falling. Nothing was different in the shop. Everything was the way it was. Nothing had fallen, nothing had collapsed. I don't know how to explain what the sound of running is like in a store when nobody is running. It causes your brain to malfunction. I just remember checking everywhere in that shop thinking there has to be somebody in here. Who made that sound? I don't think the fear properly set in until I had looked in every corner of the shop. There's nobody there. It's just me. So I go back to the counter and kind of listening to hear, is there some sounds nearby? Is there a radio that came on with static and it just sounded like this? But I can't find anything that would make that sound. So I eventually go back to what I was doing, finish up the cash up, check the shop, make sure everything's okay. I'm still on edge at this point. So eventually comes the time for me to turn off the main switch behind the desk. So I turn off the lights and I walk half the length of the shop to the front door. I get to the door of the shop, I go outside the shop, I go to lock the door. Then I realise I've left my phone on the counter. So I open the door, look in the direction of the counter, and I see somebody standing beside the counter. They're not moving, they're just there. There is no mannequin or tall item beside the counter. This is a dark outline, the size and shape of a man. This was unmistakable. Like there was something solid beside the desk. I just stopped dead because you hear horror stories of things happening to people in shops when they're on their own, locking up. And I just thought that, hey, this is now happening to me. So I immediately step backwards, turn and go out the door. And I'm standing on the pavement with no phone, just thinking what the hell am I going to do, like panicking. The street that we're on is mostly empty except for a few neighbouring shopkeepers. One of them, whose name was Mark, was from a discount bookstore and he was just pulling down his shutter. And he looked at me and he must have seen my face and asked, "Are you alright?" And I just said, "I think there's somebody in there." And he kind of frowned and said, "In your shop?" And I said, "Yeah, by the counter, there's a man in there." So Mark came over, he glanced at the door. He said, "Did you lock it?" I said, "Yeah, I think so." I don't have any recollection of locking the shop door, but I must have done in panic, just a kind of automatic thing. So he said, "Okay, come on then, open the door, let's have a look." So I opened the shop door, expecting, somebody to be there, and he's shouting, "Hello, is anyone there?" And nobody's answering. So he said, "Where's the light switch in here?" We both go over to the desk, we turn it on. There's immediately nobody that we can see in the shop. So he's walking all around the shop looking. No, nobody there. "What about your stock room?" Go over. Stockroom's locked as always. I enter the pane. We open the room door. There's nobody in there. Eventually he ends up turning to me with this look, half concerned, trying not to embarrass me, saying, nobody's there, are you sure you didn't see a reflection?" And I just said, "Yeah, I must have seen a reflection, I'm really sorry." But there was no reflection. What I saw wasn't flat, or it wasn't trick of the eye. It was a solid person. I ended up just thanking him and said something about being a bit tired and let him lock up his own place. And I just grabbed my phone, grabbed the keys, turned off the lights again and locked the door. And I didn't go back after that. I ended up making up this pathetic excuse, saying that I couldn't volunteer anymore and that my full-time job was too much at the moment, and maybe in the future I could, knowing I was never going to go back into that shop again. I honestly don't know if this thing was just attaching itself to me or causing things to happen when I was there. I don't know if it happens to other people. By the message I had sent in the WhatsApp group, there didn't seem to be any indication, or if there was other things happening to other people, they were not wanting to say what was happening to them. but I am pleased to say that it's not the end of my volunteering days. And it is a great thing for anybody to do. Thank you to Karen P for sending in your paranormal experience. And I'll never look at charity shops in the same way again. Thank you, Karen. Thank you for adding that to the list. Just kidding. Don't forget, if you have your own paranormal experience that you'd like me to narrate on the show, you can send it to scaryaparanormalpodcast@gmail.com and it just might get made into a future episode. Thank you for listening to this episode and I hope you enjoyed it. The links for everything you need can be found in this episode's show notes. And if you like what you hear, why not give the show a 5-star review? It just really helps us to get seen. I don't know why I say us because it's literally just me. Anyway, thanks for listening and join me next time for another episode of Scary.
Hey friends, it's Nikayla from the podcast Side Hustle Pro. I'm always looking for ways to keep my kids entertained without screens, and the Yoto Mini has been a total lifesaver. My kids started using it right away and haven't stopped since. Hours of stories, music, podcasts, and more, and no screens or ads. Yoto is a screen-free audio player where kids just pop in a card and listen. With hundreds of options for ages 0 to 12, it's the perfect gift they'll go back to again and again. Hey friends, it's Nikayla from the podcast Side Hustle Pro. I'm always looking for ways to keep my kids entertained without screens, and the Yoto Mini has been a total lifesaver. My kids started using it right away and haven't stopped since. Hours of stories, music, podcasts, and more, and no screens or ads. Yoto is a screen-free audio player where kids just pop in a card and listen. With hundreds of options for ages 0 to 12, it's the perfect gift they'll go back to again and again.